Hello friends, this is Dr. Cheek and this is our third lecture on the American presidency. This lecture will deal with presidential elections and presidential campaigns. The American president is arguably the most powerful elected official in the world, but the process of electing and campaigning for that office is one of the most exhilarating, sometimes the most bewildering of any political process or processes in world politics, and it's certainly one of the most challenging to understand for students of American politics. In fact, the average American citizen does not fully understand the process of how we elect a president. We're going to be studying that very important issue in the course of this lecture. Okay, let's start with the constitutional requirements for running for president and serving as president. We find these, of course, in Article 2, which describes the requirements, responsibilities, and the sort of bare bones essentials of the office of the president. So what does Article 2 say about the requirements? Some of these perhaps we've already reviewed. Okay, Article 2. What are the qualifications? Any person who is going to serve as president must be a natural-born citizen. Or, as that great social and political philosopher Bruce Springsteen said, born in the USA. Well, they have to be certainly born within the United States, according to Article 2. They have to be 35 years old, which would have been very mature in 1789. But today, we really think as a 35-year-old is someone who's still quite young. I think the average age in 1789 for a male would have been about, the average lifespan would have been about 43 years old. So that gives you some idea of the maturity that was once part of being 35 years old, where today we think of that as still being very young. Okay, the person also has a residency requirement. They have to have lived in the United States for the last 14 years, and we can explore and think about why that would have been very important. One of those reasons why it's very important is that they wanted the person to have an idea and appreciation of America as it was, or as it is for a contemporary candidate. Okay, this leads us naturally to how that election process takes place, the institutions. And you'll see in the course of our slides with this PowerPoint a number of very useful and necessary hyperlinks. So in slide 2, for example, we give some history to the background of the Electoral College, which is the institution that we use to elect a president, and some other aspects that we're going to be exploring in just a few moments. Okay, if you notice on slide 2, there's a famous picture from American movie. You probably recognize this individual, this famous American actor and comedian, John Belushi. This is from probably the greatest movie ever made, in my estimation, but that I should plead that I'm rather ignorant of movies as well, and of culture, but this is from the movie Animal House. John Belushi is wearing a sweatshirt that says Electoral College, which prompts me to tell you one of what I like to call one of the infamous Cheek vignettes, one of the stories from my very long teaching career that has inspired me to make sure that the Electoral College is part of any lecture on the American presidency that I might give. Well, the Electoral College, please keep in mind, is an actual institution. It is a part of our constitutional structure. It is in Article 2 of the Constitution. It is how we elect our presidents. Popular vote, when Americans go to the polling booths in November every 4 years and cast their votes, are then vented, reflected in the electoral vote. Not exactly, somewhat imprecisely, but typically accurately And it's actually how we elect the president is through the Electoral College vote. So it's an actual institution. Now the vignette. The year 2000, one of the most contested elections in American politics, or certainly American presidential politics. I was a professor at Lee University in Tennessee, a senior political scientist, and I was also helping out the local television affiliate, which political scientists often do as part of their community relations work. They help their fellow citizens. I was asked by this network to be their sort of political correspondent. So they would have me on every few nights discussing the election, the process. The election came, and in that particular election, it was the incumbent Vice President Al Gore, who was Vice President of Clinton, running against the governor of Texas, George Bush, of course, the son of the previous of Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, who we call Bush 41. We call George W. Bush, who would eventually be elected Bush 43, because he's the 43rd president, and his father was the 41st president. What happened in that election is it was basically a tie. It came down to the electoral vote. It actually ended up, as we'll see in a few moments in our lecture, going to the Supreme Court. It was a very, very challenging process that took place more or less as a drama over a few weeks. I happened to be walking across campus. Lee University is a beautiful campus, and a young lady came up to me and said, "Dr. Cheek, I understand that you can help me understand what's taking place in this election. I've heard there's this place called the Electoral College. I would really like to go there and take some classes to try to understand how elections take place." I almost had a heart attack. I stopped and I said to myself, this is why I need to talk more about the Electoral College. This is why it's such an important part of presidential elections and presidential campaigns. But most Americans, including this very intelligent young lady, were essentially unaware or certainly did not have a very deep appreciation of the institution. Hence, our reflections in the course of this lecture on the Electoral College. Okay, our second slide talks about the history of the Electoral College. History, by the way, as you know, is a dead subject. But this gives us a background of it as a political institution, gives us some background to how it operates, and I want you to pay particular attention to what is labeled the electoral vote calculator, which tells you actually how the Electoral College vote is part of the way we elect the president. To remind us of what we've talked about earlier in the semester, the Electoral College was an institution that was created at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Interestingly enough, it was not the primary issue of discussion. As we know from our studies, the convention in the long hot summer of 1787 in Philadelphia was one where other issues were simply more important. Representation, whether the large states or small states would have the most representation. What Congress would be like, how would it be configured? The presidency was really kind of a second-tier issue. Even more of a second-tier issue was how would we elect the president? There was a lot of discussion on that. And then Luther Martin, that great wild man of American politics, one of the great legal minds of early America, one of the great drinkers of alcohol of early America. No one could hold their own with Martin. He was a world-class imbiber of beverages. Martin came up with this idea in Electoral College, and it will actually be the way that we elect our presidents. Okay. After looking at and reading the links on slide 2, you will see what we have basically summarized throughout the early part of the semester. Basically, the Electoral College is a formula. The number of senators you have plus the number of representatives that you have equal your state's number of electoral votes. For example, In Georgia, we have 14 representatives and 2 senators. That means we have 16 electoral votes. California has 53 members of the House, 2 senators, so they have 55. See, you didn't know that taking political science, you're also going to get credit for introductory math course as well, right? Well, let's look at Wyoming. Wyoming has 1 representative and 2 senators, so they have 3 electoral votes. So in total, we have 435 House members plus 100 senators, 535, plus, as we've studied when we studied the amendments, the District of Columbia is given 3 electors via a constitutional amendment. Therefore, we have 538 electors. To win the presidency, you must win 270 electors. So now you begin to see how the process works. You might say, well, why don't presidents just campaign? If the Electoral College is based upon these votes, why don't they just campaign in New York and Texas and California? Actually, you have to win a rather broad spectrum of states. And most states, if you win that state, you get all of its electoral votes. Even if you only get 51% of the vote, you get a majority vote. We call that a winner-take-all system. Now, there are a few states, Maine and Nebraska, and we have some other states coming online that have a proportional voting system, where you get the number of electoral votes of that state based upon the percentage of vote that you get. For example, if a presidential candidate won 50% of the vote in Maine, which has 2 electoral votes, that person would get 1 electoral vote, and the other candidate, if they won the other 50%, would get that vote. So hold on to that and ponder that. Another issue that is going to change the way we elect the president is going to be the adoption of the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment, following after the first 10, as you know, we call the Bill of Rights, the 12th Amendment changed the way we elect presidents and vice presidents. After the 12th Amendment, as a result of the 12th Amendment, we elect vice presidents and presidents as a ticket, instead of the way we elected them under the original Constitution, which was basically as follows. The person who won the election becomes president, the person who comes in second becomes vice president. Think about that dynamic. It could be a battle royale from the beginning. The founders realized that. Okay. Our third slide looks at 7 controversial elections. I'd like you to look at each one of these, read about them. These are cases, these are problems with the Electoral College, where the popular vote, the actual number of votes that are cast, did not jive, so to speak, with the electoral votes. This is one of the problems of what makes the Electoral College, even to this moment, somewhat controversial in American politics. And also there's a brief mention of more recent presidential campaigns as well. Okay. This ends lecture part 1 of presidential elections and campaigns.